Welcome to Bent Souls, where broken hearts meet stories of redemption, resilience, and unexpected love. Before we dive into today's story, do something simple for me. Drop your birthday in the comments below. You never know, your soulmate might be watching right now, waiting for this very moment to connect. And tell us where you're watching from. Let's weave a circle of souls across the world, bound by shared struggles and hard-won triumphs. Now, wherever you are, whatever your beliefs, take a moment to bow your head and join me in a word of prayer for strength, healing, and hope. May every bent soul listening find light in their darkest places, courage when you feel weak, and the unwavering faith to rise again no matter how far you've fallen. This isn't just a story, it's a mirror reflecting life's toughest battles and the fiercest hope that can rise from them. So, settle in, open your heart, and stay with us till the end, because today's journey is about being pulled from Helland, the silent claim of a soul no longer lost. What if the person you trusted most was the one who tore your world apart? What if the life you built every hope, every dream crumbled silently while you were still holding on? This is Mira's story. Her world collapsed like a house of cards, delicate and fragile, crumbling at the slightest touch. She had once believed she was safe, loved, and building a future alongside the man she called her husband. But that belief was shattered. The man she loved, the one she had trusted with her heart and life, was not only unfaithful, but had been hiding a secret darker than she could imagine. He had drained their joint savings money they had both worked hard to save, money meant to secure their future, to build a home, to live with dignity. He spent it feeding a secret addiction, a hidden battle Mira never saw coming. One evening, after everything unraveled, Mira found herself standing outside the door she once called home. The lock was new, and the key was gone from her hand. The door was shut tight against her, like a final, cold rejection. She was locked out not just from the house, but from the life she thought was hers. No words, no explanations, just silence and the chilling night air around her. Mira held a small bag of belongings, the only things she could grab in those frantic moments. Everything else was left behind, swallowed by the emptiness of the locked house. Stripped of her dignity, her security, and her place in the world, Mira was thrust into a nightmare she never imagined she'd face. The pain was sharp and deep, but there was something worse, sinking feeling that she was utterly alone. She tried to reach out for help, calling friends with trembling hands and a heart full of hope. But no one answered. The calls went unanswered. The messages went unread. Each unanswered call felt like a tiny rejection, piling up like bricks in a wall, separating her from the world she once knew. Family, who might have been her refuge, didn't step in. Some said they were too busy. Others chose to stay silent, afraid to take sides or get involved. And so, Mira found herself completely isolated, left alone to face the overwhelming wave of betrayal, loss, and fear. With nowhere to go and no one to turn to, she took refuge in a small, forgotten motel room on the edge of town. The kind of place no one notices, where the walls have seen too many broken dreams. The room was bare and cold, with peeling wallpaper and a bed too thin to offer comfort. A dim lamp lit up the cracked walls, and a heater rattled softly in the corner, struggling to keep the chill at bay. It was not a home. It was a prison. Yet, it was all Mira had. In that tiny, lonely room, Mira's silent cries echoed into the darkness. No one heard her. No one came to comfort her. She cried without tears falling, mourning what was lost without a voice to share her pain. Day after day, the crushing weight of shame pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She felt dirty, broken, unworthy. She felt very hungry, a reminder of how far she had fallen. The loneliness was a shadow that clung to her every moment, whispering that she was invisible, forgotten. Outside, life went on without her. She watched through the grimy motel window as people laughed, as families gathered, as the world moved forward. Their joy was a cruel reminder of what she had lost, and the emptiness she now lived in. One freezing night, the cold seeped deep into her bones. The wind howled outside like a wild animal, echoing the chaos inside her heart. Mira sat on the edge of the thin bed, her fingers trembling, her breath shallow. The darkness inside her mind was loud and relentless, calling her to give up, to surrender, to stop fighting. The thought of letting go was terrifying but also strangely comforting. To stop struggling, to escape the pain, to find peace in the silence. She closed her eyes and felt the pull of the darkness stronger than ever. But deep inside, beneath the despair, something refused to die. A tiny spark remained small, fragile, but alive. It was the last spark of hope, the last breath of survival. It whispered that she was not finished yet. It was enough to keep her breathing, one shaky breath at a time. It was enough to hold on through the long, cold night. It was enough to face the uncertainty of tomorrow. Because sometimes, surviving is the greatest act of courage. And Mira's ember burned quietly in the heart of her hell on earth. Mira's world didn't fall apart with a loud crash. It slipped away slowly, like sand through fingers, each grain a broken promise, each moment a fading dream. She remembered the nights she tried to ignore the growing distance between her and Daniel, her husband hoping the silence would heal itself. She remembered the day she first saw the empty bank account, the piles of bills, the cold phone calls from creditors. She remembered the weight of the door closing behind her, the cold air biting her skin as she stood alone on the porch. She remembered the nights in that motel room, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, trembling with cold and fear. She remembered the hunger not just of her stomach, but of her soul. The hunger for love, for safety, for a place to belong. Mira's descent was not just about losing a home or money or trust. It was about losing herself. The woman who had once dreamed, hoped, and loved. The woman who now struggled simply to survive. And yet, even in the depths of her despair, the ember inside her burned. But while Mira's world lay in ruins, another world existed far away, world of steel and power, ruthless ambition, and cold calculation. This was the world of Alexander Kane. Alexander was everything Mira was not. Where she was fragile, he was unbreakable. Where she was vulnerable, he was commanding. Where she struggled to survive, he ruled without mercy. In the ruthless jungle of corporate power, Alexander was king. He built his empire stone by stone, deal by deal, crushing anyone who stood in his way. Rivals were obstacles to be eliminated, not people to be negotiated with. Relationships were transactions, emotions, weaknesses to be hidden or discarded. He was a man forged in fire cold, precise, and utterly without hesitation. To his employees, he was feared. To his competitors, he was a legend. To the world, he was untouchable. But beneath the iron mask and polished suits, Alexander carried scars no one saw. His past was haunted by betrayal and loss wounds that ran deep and shaped every choice he made. He trusted few because he had learned the hard way that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Every step he took was measured, every word weighed. Emotion was a danger that could unravel everything he built. One evening, at an exclusive fundraiser filled with the city's richest and most powerful, Alexander moved through the crowd like a shadow, silent, observant, always in control. The chandeliers sparkled above, the soft murmur of conversation filled the air, and beneath the polished smiles were currents of ambition and hidden agendas. As Alexander made his way past glittering tables and well-dressed guests, he overheard whispers a story carried quietly from one group to another. It was about a woman living on the edge of ruin, a tale of betrayal, survival, and quiet strength. A story that somehow echoed the darkness of his own past. Something about her caught his attention, not pity, not charity, but a cold curiosity. He found himself thinking about her long after the event ended. The woman in the story was broken, yet still alive. In her brokenness, he saw a reflection of the shadows inside his own soul. That night, Alexander made a decision. He would find her. Not to save her, not out of kindness, but because in her story, he recognized his own darkness staring back. Alexander Kane's life was a study in contrasts. To outsiders, he was a man who had it all: wealth, power, influence. But those closest to him knew the truth. He was a fortress built on pain and guarded by cold steel. Born into a world where weakness was exploited and trust was a trap, Alexander learned early that survival meant being ruthless. His childhood was not one of warmth and love. It was a battlefield, a place where alliances shifted, and every smile hid a dagger. He grew up watching people he cared for betray him, family members, friends, even mentors. Each betrayal left a scar deeper than the last, shaping the man he would become. By the time he was a young man, Alexander had mastered the art of hiding emotion. He wore a mask of indifference that few could penetrate. In boardrooms, he was a force of nature, decisive, sharp, unyielding. He built his empire through strategic moves, cutting deals that left no room for mercy. His rise was marked by crushing rivals, outmaneuvering competitors, and sacrificing relationships without hesitation. Alexander knew that, in his world, emotion was a weakness he could not afford. Yet, despite the power and control, a part of him remained haunted by the ghosts of his past. Lonely nights filled with memories of betrayal, loss, and the price of his ambition. At that fundraiser, the story about Mira reached Alexander like a distant echo of pain he knew too well. He heard about her fall from love and security to loneliness and desperation. A woman locked out of her home, left to survive alone in a cold motel room. The details were sparse but vivid enough to spark something inside him. The idea of a soul broken yet refusing to be extinguished struck a chord. Alexander rarely allowed himself to feel, but this story stirred a restless ache. For reasons he didn't fully understand, he wanted to find her. Not to offer help, not out of mercy, but because in her struggle, he saw his own reflection, the same stubborn ember of survival burning quietly in the dark. Days passed, and Alexander's curiosity turned to obsession. He began asking questions discreetly, using his vast network to track down details. Who was this woman? What was her story? Why did her fight for survival resonate with him so deeply? His search was methodical, relentless. No one escaped Alexander Kane's notice once he set his mind to something. Slowly, piece by piece, he uncovered the truth of Mira's life, the betrayal, the loss, the lonely months in the motel. Each revelation pulled him further into a world far removed from his own world of pain and vulnerability he rarely faced. But, instead of turning away, Alexander leaned in. Because in that brokenness, he saw a challenge he couldn't resist. Alexander's world and Mira's world could not have been more different. One ruled by power and control, the other by survival and hope. Yet, in their darkness, they were mirrors of each other. Two souls scarred by betrayal, each fighting to hold on to hope. Mira's days had become a relentless search for survival. She scavenged for work wherever she could find it, facing rejection after rejection. Her clothes, once clean and neat, had become tattered and worn. Her spirit, once bright with dreams, was battered and bruised by the weight of loss and loneliness. Each morning she woke, the same gnawing question haunted her. How would she make it through today? Her steps were heavy as she walked the city streets, eyes cast low to avoid the pitying stares and whispered judgments. The world seemed to move around her at a dizzying speed while she struggled just to stay in place. One day, Mira found herself at a local diner, a small, cramped place where the scent of fried food mingled with the hum of tired conversations. She took a job washing dishes for minimal pay, barely enough to cover a meal or two, let alone a place to sleep. The work was hard, the hours long, and the pay pitiful, but it was something. A thread of hope woven through the fabric of her despair. She scrubbed plates and pans late into the night, her hands raw and aching. Her feet ached from standing, and her back ached from bending. But she kept going, because giving up was no longer an option. One evening, as the diner emptied and the night crept in, Alexander appeared. His search led him to a small, run-down diner on the edge of town. The kind of place where weary souls come and go unnoticed. Alexander entered quietly, his presence commanding yet unnoticed by most. There, behind the counter, washing dishes with quiet determination, was Mira. Her clothes hung loosely, stained and worn. Her eyes held the fatigue of someone who had seen too much, but also a sparker, stubborn refusal to break. Alexander's gaze fixed on her. Recognition wasn't about knowing her name or face, Before, it was about seeing the truth beneath the surface. He saw the ember of survival burning inside her, the same fire that once refused to die within himself. Mira noticed him, then an unfamiliar figure, standing in the doorway, eyes sharp, assessing. Her heart quickened, confusion and caution mixing within her. Who was this man watching her so intently? His expression held no softness, no kindness, only steel and unspoken challenge. Alexander stepped closer. He spoke in a voice that brooked no argument. "I've heard your story." Mira's breath caught. How much did he know? His eyes didn't waver. "I can offer you a way out." She shook her head slightly, disbelief shadowing her face. "A way out?" she whispered, voice fragile. "Yes," he said, "but it won't be easy." He laid out the terms clearly. "You will work harder than anyone else. You will follow orders without question, and you will never expect kindness." His words were blunt, even harsh. But for Mira, weighed down by despair, the offer was a lifeline. Not because she trusted him, far from it, but because she needed to escape the hell she lived in. After a long silence, she nodded. "I'll take it." And with that, Alexander didn't pull her gently. He gripped her with the cold, hard reality of his world, a world that demanded strength and obedience. From the moment Mira stepped into Alexander's realm, she was no longer the lost woman scrubbing dishes in a diner. She was being remade. Under his cold command, every day was a trial by fire. The hours stretched long and merciless. The standards were unforgiving, a constant pressure that pressed down on her like a weight she could never shrug off. There was no room for weakness, no allowance for mistakes. Alexander demanded perfection not because he expected kindness, but because in his world, only the strongest survived. Praise was a language he did not speak. Every misstep, every falter, was met not with anger or words, but with silence. A silence so heavy it felt like punishment itself, a reminder that failure was never acceptable. In those moments, Mira felt the sting of isolation deeper than ever. But in the fire of his ruthlessness, something inside her began to change. She stopped searching for sympathy. She stopped hoping for kindness that would never come. Instead, she started fighting. Fighting not for approval, but for survival. The woman who had once been broken now learned to stand tall amid the storm. Their relationship was a battlefield filled with sharp glances, unspoken tension, and a complicated understanding that neither spoke aloud. Alexander did not save her. He claimed her soul not with words, but with his relentless presence. The way he watched her rise and break in equal measure, Mira knew this was no act of salvation. This was conquest. Mira's transformation was not gentle. It was brutal and necessary. Each day began before the sun and ended long after it had set. The work demanded focus, precision, and a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She learned to move through the endless tasks with a quiet determination, pushing her limits beyond what she thought possible. Her body ached, her mind raced, but she never stopped. Alexander observed silently, his gaze like steel-piercing and unyielding. He never praised. He never comforted. But his approval, though rare, was unmistakable when it came. A slight nod, a rare glance of recognition, it was enough to fuel her to keep going. Every day, Mira shed pieces of her old self, the woman broken by betrayal and loss. In her place grew a new version, sharper, stronger, forged in the fire of Alexander's command. But the cost was high. The woman who had once sought love and safety now walked a path of discipline and survival. She was no longer searching for softness in a harsh world. She was becoming a force to be reckoned with. But becoming stronger doesn't mean the war inside disappears. It only gets quieter, colder. Mira walked through her days with steel in her spine, her movements sharp, her eyes steady. She took orders, carried out tasks, outworked everyone around her. And still underneath it, all her heart was a battlefield. Every part of her resisted his control. She hated how he watched her with that cold, unreadable stare. How he gave her everything she needed, but never what she wanted. No comfort, no softness, no human warmth. But that same control, she needed it. In the chaos that had once drowned her, Alexander's world gave her shape. His rules gave her something to lean on when she had nothing left. His cold silence became the only constant she could rely on. Mira didn't know whether to despise him or depend on him. So, she did both. Each night, when the building emptied and the harsh fluorescent lights dimmed to a low hum, Mira sat alone at her desk, wrestling with questions that refused to let her sleep. Why her? Why had he chosen her? Was she just another project to heim a broken thing he wanted to mold? Was this strength she was building her own? Or his? The breaking point came on a Thursday night. The day had been long, filled with impossible demands. An error in a report had cost hours of rework. Another department's failure had landed on her lap. And through it all, Alexander had said nothing, no blame, no instruction, just that maddening silence. He had passed her once in the hallway that day. Their eyes met, briefly. He gave her a look that said everything and nothing. That night, when most of the staff had left, and the office echoed with nothing but buzzing lights and distant city noise, Mira couldn't take it anymore. She didn't knock. She walked straight into his office. Alexander looked up from his desk. His expression didn't change. He said nothing. Mira stood across from him, chest rising and falling with quiet fury. "Why me?" she asked, her voice sharp. He didn't respond. "Why this cruelty?" she asked again. Her voice cracked. She wasn't asking for pity, she was demanding truth. Alexander sat still, watching her with those eyes that never blinked, never softened. And then, finally, he spoke. His voice was low, quiet, but it landed like a blow. "Because I see what you're made of." She flinched. "You survived hell, Mira. You crawled out of fire. You didn't break. That makes you mine." She stepped back slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of his words. "Not because I saved you," he continued, eyes locked on hers, "but because you belong to this world now, silent, strong, unbroken." Mira said nothing. She couldn't. The words cut deep not in pain, but in a way that left no place to hide. In his voice, there was no pride, no gentleness, just truth. She hated it. She understood it. And something in her shifted. Not love, not forgiveness, but recognition. A bond was forged not in kindness or passion, but in pain, respect, and something darker. Possession. And Mira, standing in that office with a storm in her chest, realized that she didn't want to run. Not yet. Not anymore. Because somewhere in his cold madness, she had found something solid. And in her own silence, she had discovered her will. There were no declarations of love, no soft words whispered into the night, no promises beneath moonlight. There were no grand gestures, no flowers, no apologies. There was only presence, tension, stillness. The kind that speaks louder than words ever could. Mira didn't know what to call what existed between them. It wasn't love, at least. Not the kind she'd imagined as a girl. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't comfort. But it was real. It was something raw and burning. Two damaged souls drawn not by romance, but by the quiet gravity of shared ruin. Their bond wasn't built through healing. It was formed in fire, twisted in silence, and made solid by survival. Mira's past hell, the hunger, the betrayal, the loneliness was now behind her, but it had only been replaced by another kind of torment, a different kind of hell. This one didn't scream, it whispered. It was a life ruled by control, by structure, by unspoken rules written into every look Alexander gave her. She still felt trapped at times, still felt the burn of his coldness. But it was no longer the burn of abandonment, it was something else. Strangely painfully, she began to understand that in this silence, she had found a kind of freedom. There were no lies here. Alexander's ruthlessness wasn't just a weapon, it was a shield. For him, for her, neither of them dared open the door to softness, because softness could be destroyed. But structure, power, discipline, it held them both together like armor over broken skin. Mira didn't belong to him in the way lovers do. And yet, she was his. Alexander had never said it, never needed to. And she had never agreed to it, never had to. But in the space between their silences, the claim had already been made. They were each other's salvation, and each other's prison, claimed without words, bound without chains. And somehow, in the ruins, they stood, still breathing, still burning, still together, in silence. As dawn broke over the city, Mira stood in front of the mirror. The early sunlight spilled across the room, brushing against her face, revealing a woman transformed. She no longer saw the girl who had trembled in the cold outside a locked door. She didn't see the shattered soul curled up on a motel bed, crying into silence. What she saw now was power. Not loud, not boastful, but steady, rooted, alive. The mirror reflected someone who had been dragged through fire and came out not untouched but unbroken. Her eyes were clearer now. Her skin carried the glow of someone who had learned to endure. The lines on her face weren't of age or sorrow, they were of growth, of survival, of rising. The day began like any other, but something in the air had shifted. Mira walked into work not with fear, but with clarity. She wasn't afraid of failure anymore. She had already survived the worst. And now, even under pressure, she carried calm. She carried herself. Colleagues who once whispered about the cold woman under Cain's command now watched her with quiet respect. Not because of what Alexander had done, but because of who she had become in spite of it. There were moments, sharp moments, when she caught Alexander watching her from afar. Not with ownership, not with hunger, but with pride. With recognition, two bent souls, bound not by chains, but by the storms they had both endured. But the past, like smoke, always finds a crack to slip through. One afternoon, long after Mira had stopped expecting it, her phone rang. A number she hadn't saved, but one her heart remembered. She stared at the screen, frozen for a moment, then answered, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was slower now, hollow. "Mira?" Her breath caught. "Daniel?" There was silence, a long one. Then a sigh. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. Mira said nothing. I wanted to say I was wrong, about everything." He told her how he'd crashed after she left, how the addiction had consumed him, how he had nearly lost everything. And then, one day, looking at his reflection in a gas station bathroom, he had broken completely. It was the lowest point, and the first moment he wanted to be better. Not for her, not for anyone, just because the darkness had finally sickened him. He checked into rehab, alone, got clean, alone, and now, months later, he was calling, not to win her back, just to say he had come to himself. And he understood now what she had endured, what he had taken from her. Mira listened, not with tears, not with anger, just silence. At the end of it, she said only one thing. "I survived." "I know," Daniel whispered, "and I'm glad." She hung up. There was no bitterness in her chest, just closure, a door she no longer needed to knock on. That night, as Mira returned home, the city lights glimmered around her like stars fallen to earth. She took the elevator up to the rooftop of her building, and there, standing against the wind, was Alexander. He didn't turn when she stepped beside him, but she knew he'd been waiting. They stood in silence, side by side, watching the city pulse with life. "I spoke to my ex today," she said. Alexander didn't respond, but his jaw tightened slightly. He apologized. A pause. "I forgave him," she added. Another pause. "Not because he deserved it, but because I did." Alexander turned then, finally facing her. "You never needed him," he said. Mira smiled. "Number, but I needed to know I wasn't his anymore." A quiet settled between them. Not heavy this time, not tense. It was peace. Later, as they walked back into their shared space, Alexander brushed against her arm not as a command, but as a question. And Mira, without words, leaned in slightly. Not owned, not conquered, just present. Weeks turned into months. Alexander changed in ways only she could see. He still barked orders, still moved like a man carved from iron. But at night, in private moments, his eyes softened. He let her speak more. He listened. And Mira, in return, allowed herself to be seen. Not as a project, not as a survivor, but as a woman reclaiming her life, one breath at a time. The world outside remained brutal. But inside between theme, it was no longer hell. It was something else. Not quite heaven, but something real. Something earned. Mira would never again be that woman locked out of her home. She had built a new one. Not out of bricks, not out of dependence, but out of grit. And quiet strength. They never married, never wore labels, but everyone around them knew. He was hers. She was his, not by possession, but by recognition. Bent souls, claimed not in chains, but in silence. And that silence, it was their peace, their fire, their dawn, not a new hell, a new beginning. Life doesn't always save us with kindness. Sometimes, salvation wears a ruthless face, a cold stare, a steel grip, a storm disguised as structure. And sometimes, that's exactly what we need, not comfort, but confrontation, not ease, but the demand to rise. Mira's story isn't a fairy tale. It's raw, unforgiving, true. Because in the real world, the deepest claims don't come with flowers or vows. They come in silence. In the way two broken people see each other and stay. If this story touched you, if something in Mira's fire or Alexander's shadow spoke to your own, then share your thoughts in the comments below. Say where you're watching from. You never know. Your soulmate might be waiting quietly, right there in the silence with you. Thank you for watching, Bent Souls. And remember, stay strong in the silence.